All right, so today we're going to talk about personality disorders. We have your next exam this Friday. You have a final failure essay that's coming up that you can go ahead and be working on. On that, there's no, the structure of that is laid out for you. There's several questions to answer about the book. Each question has like a word limit, so make sure you're staying within that. There's no like introduction or conclusion or something. You just answer those questions. That's the format for that. Good? Great. All right. So, like I said, today we're going to talk about some personality disorders, and then we'll cover eating disorders, and then you'll have your exam, and then next week we'll talk about stress and health. And then you have your finals. There we go. All right. Personality disorders are a broad class of disorders that involve sort of extreme expressions of personality traits. And those extreme expressions of personality traits result in maladaptive behavior that impairs people's ability to sort of function in society. And often people with personality disorders are able to function within society, but their behaviors often violate social norms. So there are 10 distinct different disorders that are organized into 3 categories, 3 clusters. Odd, eccentric, including paranoid and schizoid. Dramatic, impulsive, which is the one that we're primarily going to focus on. That's what your book focuses on, with antisocial and borderline personality. And then anxious and fearful, with avoidant and dependent. So we're going to focus on, well, your book focuses on these 3. We're going to talk about in more detail antisocial and borderline personality disorder. But these are often, this class of disorders are often the hardest to treat. Why would you think that might be? Why do you think it might be hard to treat these disorders? Yeah, did you?
It seems like a lot of these are like very deeply rooted in both like your upbringing and just like you as a whole, and so it seems like it'd be very hard to like move that out.
Yeah, so because they're extreme expressions of different personality traits, it is deeply rooted in the individual. Often people don't recognize that this behavior is abnormal, right? And that makes it hard to treat because if you're not aware of the abnormality, then you're not seeking help, or if you're made to get help, you're not buying into that program, that sort of thing. So because often people don't recognize the abnormality of their behavior, it makes it difficult to treat. All right, so antisocial personality disorder. A principal sort of underlying symptom of this disorder is violating social norms, particularly with regard to moral principles. And it involves some of the personality traits involved are impulsiveness, being manipulative, being aggressive, and irresponsible. It develops as individuals' personality develops in their teen years, and typically start seeing the first symptoms in late teens, early 20s. There's sort of a hallmark of this is a disregard for others' rights, and a lack of remorse. So again, not recognizing that not recognizing that their behavior is abnormal. It has a pretty low prevalence. Personality disorders in general, because they're on sort of a spectrum of severity, when you have less severe, right, you're not going to be diagnosed as often with that. It's higher in males than in females, 3 to 1, expressed in this. And so antisocial personality disorder, like I said, the severity of it, when you have severe symptoms of this, people often end up incarcerated because they do illegal things as part of their failure to comply with social norms. When it's on the lesser side, though, they're often just sort of cunning, manipulative types of people. There's a high percent of drug abuse with this. Again, part of that is sort of violating social norms, not recognizing the abnormality of their behavior. And again, a lot of legal offenders have some form of antisocial personality disorder. A case study of this, Ted Bundy was a serial killer. A lot of serial killers or murderers have antisocial personality tendencies. Obviously, that's one of the hugest violations of social norms. It's rooted in both biology and in environment. And so Ted Bundy was born in the 40s, and he was born to a single mother, and back then that was very taboo. He didn't know who his father was, and he was bullied and shy, but very intelligent. And intelligence is often a trait that's associated with successful or people antisocial personality disorder. In college, he became sort of an outcast. He fell in love with a woman who rejected him, and that sort of initiated him becoming a predator on women. And in 1974, when he was sort of at his height, college women were disappearing at a rate of 1 per month. So this is a big deal that was happening, and nobody knew what was sort of going on. Obviously, there was a serial murderer loose, but he was very good at eluding the police. In fact, once he was captured, he escaped jail twice. He ended up confessing to 30 murders in 7 states, but the real number, we're not even really sure of that defense. There's probably likely more murders that he didn't confess to. He was finally captured after he escaped twice in 1978, and then was executed in the late 80s in Florida. So Hollywood likes to depict people with antisocial personality disorder as villains in movies. They're often shown to have this sort of high level of intelligence, and that they're very calculating and calm, and able to be in control and avoid law enforcement. But in reality, most people with antisocial personality disorder are not that way. They have short tempers, they're impulsive, they're not in control, and they often have impaired cognitive abilities as opposed to having high levels of intellect. That isn't made for good movies, and so sort of over misrepresented in Hollywood. So this is an example. This is a pretty typical example of someone with antisocial personality disorder. You'll hear them talking about some of their childhood experiences that led to this.
You told me when you were younger, under 15, you had all those fights. You ever have a fight with a weapon? And you were carrying a gun or a knife?
A knife?
A knife. That was when you were under 15?
Yeah, that's when I was little. My mother said she been working across that gave me a break on a case like that. But I ain't got caught 13-inch switchblades, throwing knives, and that. I had caught a lot of different things like that.
How old were you?
Like 11, 12 years old. Used to throw bricks at people, bust their heads, hit them with bottles and everything. I ain't care. You know, whatever it took to beat me, that's what I did.
Now, when you were doing that, were you really trying to hurt them?
Yeah, just trying to hurt them. Because like I said, I didn't have no feelings for nobody. But I felt like killing somebody. Before I came to this hospital, but I felt like killing somebody I didn't care about.
When you were younger, less than 15, did you ever destroy property?
I used to see the bus drivers coming down Grand Avenue, opening up one step in the bus door, throw bricks at them and everything, and run.
How old were you when you started?
10, 11 years old. And I was right down the street from the house I had for a run. You know, one time I took a paper machine, they had the papers in. I took it and dragged it in the boys club, busted up, and took the money out.
Out of the machine?
Yeah, you know how you break the machine back, it had the top. I broke the top off, took the money out of the machine.
Was that something you do a lot when you were younger too, lying to people?
Yeah, but I did out with whooping.
How about in school, lying in school?
Yeah, I mean, I was lying daily at school because, you know, I go back to school, why wouldn't you at home? I mean, why wouldn't you at school? I was sick. Go home, my mom was like, was you at school? Yes, man, I was at school. No, I wasn't even at school. I was at home, on the telephone, watching TV, legs kicked up and everything.
Now, how about fires? You know, I asked you that.
Yeah, I ain't do no major fires like burning buildings up, man. But I ain't tell you no big. I used to set trash cans on fire, right?
Now, were you doing that to keep warm? Or
No, I'm doing that just to see some fires, just for the hell of it.
so if it was important, valuable stuff, then you didn't care.
No.
So there you see the lack of remorse there. And also, people with antisocial personality disorder, they recognize what they're doing is maybe wrong, they just don't care about it, right? And so, so that's part of why this is a hard disorder to treat, because they don't see anything wrong with their action, that lack of remorse. They know that lying isn't right, or they know that they're supposed to go to school or setting fires isn't right. I mean, they know that their behavior is bad, but again, they just don't care about that.
When you were told,
All right, so what about the etiology for this? So there's genetic contributions. There's a 50% concordance rate in identical twins for antisocial personality disorder, 20% in fraternal. There is both neurochemical imbalances, so they tend to have higher levels of testosterone. Again, this happens 3 times more prevalent in males than females. They tend to have lower amounts of serotonin, if we look at those levels. And they have abnormal brain activity. So again, areas that typically control this kind of behavior are not able to do that. So things like the prefrontal cortex, frontal lobes, their emotion system, they lack the appropriate emotional responses to their actions for hurting others. Yes.
What did you say about the brain areas? Were they like those parts of the area?
Yes. Yes. So these parts are not functioning properly. There's also significant environmental influences, though, as well, particularly early childhood, we think. And so often harsh parenting or neglect or lack of parental role models or influence can cause this exposure to violence at an early age. So there's social cognitive factors at play, environmental factors at play with this. And then, as sort of evidenced by this impaired physiology, they often have, again, they don't exhibit the proper emotional responses to stimulus. They typically have sort of lower arousal rates, right? So that they can do these illegal or violent activities and not become aroused by them. In terms of treatment, comorbidities for treatment. So often people who have antisocial personality disorder also have other disorders, and some of the most common are anxiety, depression, bipolar, and substance abuse. You mentioned substance abuse being very high in this. And we can see that in some of these abnormal behaviors that there's an overlap with bipolar disorder. The impulsivity, the aggressiveness, irresponsibility, those sorts of things. Right? Where they don't overlap is in having delusions of grandeur or insomnia for bipolar disorder, and then over here, the not learning from consequences, lack of remorse, and lying are sort of hallmarks of antisocial personality disorder. In terms of treatment, if it's identified early on, right, this is often diagnosed in children as conduct disorder. It then ends up in adulthood being antisocial personality disorder. But trying to improve the environment, whether that's through parental training, trying to improve the parental management of those children. And then in adults, cognitive behavioral therapy to try to get them to recognize when they're acting inappropriately and how to then shift those negative thoughts into more positive ones. So recognizing consequences of their actions, trying to learn how to have empathy for others, to understand how other people might feel based on their behavior. There are drugs that are prescribed for this, but there's not like a specific antisocial personality drug. So often they may be given antipsychotic drugs to decrease aggression or violent behavior. They may be given antidepressants. Again, low serotonin is a feature of this. Or they may be given mood stabilizers to try to calm them down. But this is, there isn't a specific drug for antisocial personality disorder. Okay, borderline personality disorder. There's a whole host of symptoms associated with borderline personality disorder, and you have to have 5 or more of these symptoms persistent in order to be diagnosed with it. A primary one is a feeling of imagined or real abandonment, or a fear of abandonment. Again, changes in mood, extreme emotions. So whereas antisocial personality disorder sort of lacks emotions, and borderline personality disorder, you have the opposite. You have sort of overexpression of emotions. Impulsivity, impaired cognitive perceptions of self and self-worth and how others view you. And as part of the impulsiveness, there's often self-destructive behaviors. So it may be suicidal ideation. It could also be things like cutting or self-injurious behavior associated with this. Substance abuse is often common. That's maybe a coping mechanism to try and to deal with this, an inappropriate coping mechanism. And then because obviously of the instability of their emotion and behavior, that often leads to problems with relationships, either not being able to form relationships or abusive relationships or manipulative relationships, those sorts of things, unstable relationships. This is more prevalent in females, twice as prevalent in females than in males. So while antisocial personality disorder is more prevalent in males, borderline personality disorder tends to be more prevalent in females. And again, prevalence rate is pretty low, 1.6%. And that's for, obviously, for diagnosable ones. So just like I talked about the severity sort of is on a continuum, we have the same sort of thing for this. And so sometimes, as we'll see with our case studies, sometimes you have sort of high-functioning people that exhibit some of these traits. And may be self-aware of that, maybe seeking help for it. And again, in Hollywood, they tend to dramatize this disorder like they do with antisocial personality disorders. So those two mental health disorders tend to be overrepresented as villains in movies. So Pete Davidson has been diagnosed with antisocial personality, with borderline personality disorder, and has been sort of open about his treatment.
I was recently diagnosed with borderline personality disorder.
My name is Dr. Courtney Tracy. Borderline personality disorder is usually a mental health disorder that results from childhood trauma or childhood attachment issues.
It's like fear of abandonment. Because I would always be like, I think everybody's mad at me, everybody hates me.
People with borderline personality disorder have difficulties regulating their emotions, being okay and stable in relationships, and being able to manage their own thought processes.
For anyone dealing with it, there are treatments that can help.
What I'm being treated with is like called DBT skills. Yeah. Which is dialectical behavior. Yeah.
DBT stands for dialectical behavioral therapy. It addresses 4 different aspects of your well-being, so it takes a look at mindfulness, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, and emotional regulation. Thanks so much, Pete, for opening up about your borderline. As a therapist that also has borderline personality disorder, we appreciate it. And as always,
All right, and then this is another example of
So, were you feeling bored when you got your rest?
Yes, it was boring. I may as well have been in San Francisco shoplifting. The bathrooms. I mean, it seemed like a good idea at first, and then it wasn't. Here I am, a guy in my late 30s, living with fraternity kids. They're self-centered. It just didn't work out.
Here, the interviewer asks if Mr. Rice was bored when he got his rest. And this is notable because, one, this is the first time the interviewer really is asked directly if he's cut his wrist, but this is also the first time he admits, not overtly, but subtly, that he's cut his wrist, in fact, out of boredom and out of his own volition. In fact, he admits that feelings of boredom and a sense of emptiness triggered him to engage impulsively in this self-mutilating behavior. He also makes an offhand mention of a further history of impulsive, reckless behaviors when he said, I may as well have been in San Francisco shoplifting or whoring in the bathrooms. And this illuminates criteria 5 and 7 of borderline personality disorder: recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures or threats, or self-mutilating behavior and cutting wrists, and a chronic feeling of emptiness. This also highlights a very important aspect of personality disorder assessment. This is in any personality disorder. Clues lie in the interview itself, but also diagnoses are made only by assessing a person's history. This is necessary as a timeline of sorts needs to be created, in a sense, to uncover a history of a stable, persistent, and pervasive pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviate markedly from the expectation of one's own individual culture.
All right, so there you see two very different case studies. You have Pete Davidson, who's obviously a successful actor, but recognizes that he has this deviant behavior associated with these feelings of abandonment unstable sort of emotion expression, versus the gentleman here that's much more severe, is doing self-injurious behavior, is in a clinical setting, has been institutionalized because of this, right? So again, sort of there's a spectrum of the severity of symptoms. Again, in terms of etiology, there's a strong genetic component again. There's a biological component to this, and there's social factors. So again, childhood environment playing a particular role in personality disorders. Often there's some issue with maternal attachment. Right? So we talked about in the developmental pillar about how important attachment is for proper development, how even monkeys will seek that out over food and water. And so when there's issues with that during development, it can lead to this these unstable emotional expressions. Often there's some parental psychopathology that's underlying the reasons why their childhood experiences weren't good. So if a parent has, for instance, bipolar disorder is a common one, right, that is the reason that there's not that attachment. Or if there's substance abuse, that's another common issue with forming appropriate parent-child relationships. And then in terms of biological factors, we see some abnormalities with the amygdala. What's the amygdala involved with? Yeah, emotional value, right? So assigning emotional value to different stimuli, so not being able to appropriately do that, hallmark of borderline personality disorder. Hippocampus and the temporal lobe involved with sort of memory formation and appropriate cognitive patterns. So these sort of misinterpretations of how people feel about us or how we feel about ourselves, sort of rooted in the temporal lobe there. And in research that's been done on this, they tend to have a more negative outlook on life, right? And this is seen in, if we ask people to rate the emotional expression of the various faces, they tend to rate neutral faces as being more negative than neutral. All right, treatment in that Pete Davidson clip, they alluded to this, dialectical behavioral therapy. This is a specialized form of cognitive behavioral therapy that's helping people learn how to change the way that they express emotion. Change the way that they express emotion, to gain better control over their emotions, to learn how to trust themselves instead of forming improper sort of relationships or codependent relationships with other people. And working on some of the history of that trauma. So often this childhood neglect, right, working through those issues, trying to resolve those issues in order to control their emotion better. Oops. Okay. Eating disorders. We'll shift gears. We'll get into this a little bit today. And then maybe that'll give us some time on Wednesday. If you have questions, we can do some review for the exam for Pillar 5. All right, so the DSM-5 has 3 sort of major categories of eating disorders that I'm sure you are aware of and have heard about before. Anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. But then there's also 3 more rare and specialized disorders that can happen. see the percents of these are actually fairly high compared to what we were just seeing with personality disorders that were in the like 1 to 2% range. Here we're looking at 5% higher. Pica disorder is when people are eating non-food substances. And so some common things are paper, soap, chalk, could be substances like soil or dirt or rocks. And again, this is something that's persistent and that it's not developmentally related, right? So infants under the age of 2 will often put non-food items in their mouth. That doesn't count as part of this. They have to be old enough to sort of know better that that's not a food item. Rumination disorder is where people have effortless regurgitation of food. And so this is different than what we'll talk about with bulimia, where people are purging. That's an effortful regurgitation of food. So here they're having this regurgitation of food, and they often will re-chew that or re-swallow that. And so this becomes sort of a habitual behavior. And then the last one, ARFID, is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And this has a fairly high prevalence in children and adolescents, but usually can be resolved. And so in adults, it has a relatively low prevalence. And this is a avoidant behavior for food. It's often based on sensory characteristics of the food, so they don't want to eat a particular type of food because of the way it feels, the tactile sensations, the touch sensations of those. Or they have maladaptive cognitive patterns about eating types of food. Again, can often be resolved in childhood. And so it's sort of treated as a developmental disorder with fairly low prevalence in adulthood. All right, so turning to these, the three major ones. What is the etiology of eating disorders? And again, multifaceted, complex sort of behaviors. There is a genetic vulnerability. It's lower than what we see with personality disorders. And there are certain personality traits that tend to be associated with eating disorders. Scoring high on neuroticism, perfectionism, deficits in abilities to regulate emotions are commonly associated with this. Other impacts, we know that there's environmental impacts from media, social media, and sort of the representation of role models and excuse me, relating back to this sort of perfectionism idea of setting a bar that's maybe not attainable for everybody. And again, parents can often have a strong influence on the development of eating disorders. So whether it be through through traumatic things like child abuse, or more subtle things such as sort of negative comments about body image and feeding behaviors from parents to children. Cognitive factors, there's distorted body image representation, so again, a cognitive distortion of self, that incongruence model that we talked about with personality theory. But there's also sort of a rigidness or all or none sort of attitude of thinking and controlling thought patterns. So a need to feel like they're in control. So often the expression of the eating disorder is someone's ability to cognitively be taking control of a behavior with that. So again, multifaceted, both biological underpinnings, but also environmental influences on the formation of disorders. If we look at anorexia, anorexia is a restrictive eating, and there's intense fear of gaining weight, even though individuals are often very much underweight. It's more prevalent in women than in males. The severity of it is based on BMI scores, and so there can be from mild to severe, sort of, again, on the spectrum of severity. There are two subtypes of anorexia. There's just the restrictive type, where there's just lack of feeding and not eating enough calories, but there's no evidence of binging or purging. And then there's a binging purging type, where they may have periods in which they overconsume, but then they end up purging and end up having restrictive calories so that they're still losing weight with that behavior. Again, this is self-induced vomiting or taking laxatives is another common form of the purging type. Let's take a look at this case.
I understand that you have some difficulties eating and with your eating habits. Could you just describe it for us?
Yeah, basically it's, I don't want to eat because it seems like as soon as I eat, I just gain weight, get fat. Look bulgy to me anyway, so that only makes it worse. But then there's sometimes where, I can't stop it, I have to, and then once I eat, regardless of the amount, there's a strong urge to either purge or take laxatives or something along those lines.
Is it a particular number of pounds that you're aware of? You say that you're worried about your weight.
Mm-hmm. I guess you could say that the only problem is that it never stops. You start at a weight, it becomes very obsessive, where you're getting on the scale 10 times a day.
How much do you weigh?
Well, I weigh 96 pounds. Now.
Are you aware of, for your height and build, what your so-called ideal weight might be?
No, not really. There was a time where I thought that I had it under control and I wasn't getting on the scale at all and eating regular meals, and I know that at that point I was 118 pounds, and that's probably a good weight for me. I remember feeling okay there when I was there.
Okay. Do you notice that as you lose more weight, does your concern lessen about the weight, or does it grow larger?
It grows larger.
So the lower down you go in terms of your weight, the concern about it and the drive to lose more actually increases.
Right.
Is that what you understood? I want to go back and ask him again about more detail. You said that you have to get rid of weight when you gain it. How do you do that?
Usually I try and do it now. And sometimes I'm successful at that, I feel better and it's fine. Sometimes I can't throw it out for whatever reason, I don't know. So then it's, if I can, it can be exercise. Like on a weekend, if I don't do anything planned, I'll probably, work out for 2 hours. But if it's like a work situation where I'm at work or we had a birthday party and I can't, then it's a laxative.
You use the word obsession. Is that the sense that you know?
Yeah, I think that's very much it. so shallow. I guess that's so aggravating when you realize that, because you are going to gain a pound. If not today, it'll be tomorrow. And pretty soon you're going to get looking real fat again and you're going to be worthless.
Even when you lose pounds, you feel like your body doesn't look right or feel right. What is it that you notice? Or in what way does your body feel right?
It feels fat. And when I look in the mirror, especially, around the stomach and the hips and, the back end and around up here, it just looks fat. It hangs almost like I'm pregnant.
So this is a really good classical representation of some of the symptoms associated with anorexia. So the distorted body image and the sort of obsessive thoughts about it, and that once, and also a self-awareness that she has a problem. But it's, again, those obsessive thoughts are not, she's not able to control those, right, without some sort of behavioral intervention, right, without some cognitive treatment. So, again, restrictive feeding behavior, obsessive exercise is another thing that can be associated with this, and really that distortion of body image, and feeling very uncomfortable talking about that. You can see that in her demeanor there. So, etiology for anorexia. There is likely a genetic component. We don't know as much about that, but there's definitely physiological abnormalities. It's not just a psychological, a thought pattern disorder. Often there may be some childhood trauma, again, associated with the development of this, that we talked about with sort of the general etiology. And there's environmental influences. So sometimes you can see the formation of eating disorders in athletes that are in sports that are pushing them to have lower weights. Again, the influence of social media and role models in society, and the cognitive effects, right? So distortions of the body image, of self-control, perfectionism, these sorts of things associated with this. Bulimia is associated, it's an eating disorder that sometimes can be harder to diagnose the difference between the purging and binging and purging type of anorexia and bulimia. But that's sort of the common thing with bulimia, is that there is this cycle of both binge eating, so consuming, sort of a loss of control of consuming food, whereas with anorexia it's much more restrictive, and so someone may slip up and eat more food and then purge in anorexia, whereas with bulimia this is a sort of lack of self-control. And then there's some compensatory behavior after that. So you definitely have this cyclic behavior. Again, issues with body shape. Often here there's more self-esteem or guilt or shame about the lack of control of eating associated with that. And often with bulimia, people are able to maybe maintain a normal weight so they don't have the weight loss issues that we see with anorexia. But because of their purging, they often are nutritionally deficit. And so there's often nutritional issues that have to be dealt with that aren't related to calories, but are associated with proper, having a proper balance of vitamins and salts, that sort of thing. The chronic use of laxatives as a means of purging can sometimes lead to a dependence on laxatives in order to have bowel movements, which can be a side effect of this disorder. And again, it's more prevalent in women than in men. All right. Etiology, it's less clear with bulimia than it is with anorexia, but there are, again, biological abnormalities in some of the feeding areas of the brain and the cognitive pathways of control with feeding in the brain. Obviously, the negative self-esteem and stress, those issues can be a contributor towards this. And so sometimes people will do this binging behavior as almost a coping mechanism for not feeling good, so having stress eating, this sort of thing, stress triggering that. And sometimes dieting can trigger this. So people that are put themselves on a restrictive diet then will become so hungry that they then binge eat, and then they feel guilty about having binge ate, so then they do the compensatory behavior. So sometimes this can trigger an episode of this. Right? And so that behavior can be a contributing factor to the development of bulimia or nervousness. And then our last of the three disorders is binge eating disorder. And this is where, again, you can sort of see the relationship between these three sort of classes. So with anorexia, there's restrictiveness. With bulimia, you have binging and purging. And then with binging, you don't have that purging aspect. So it's like bulimia, it has a lot of the same issues as bulimia, but you don't have the purging behavior. Lower prevalence of binge eating disorder. This is a newer disorder. It's not in the DSM-4, but was added in the DSM-5. And the binge eating episodes have to have 3 or more of these behaviors. Eating because, eating alone because of you're being embarrassed about how much they're eating, having guilt about the binge eating session, eating until they're beyond full, eating more rapidly than usual, or eating large amounts when they know that they're not hungry. Again, with all of the eating disorders, people are often very self-aware of these disorders, very different than what we looked at with personality disorders, where people are often sort of unaware of those. All right, so I'll pick up here. I don't want to hold y'all late today, but we'll wrap up binge eating disorder, and then we'll talk about some treatments for eating disorders. And then if you have questions, bring those for Code 5. I'm happy to go back over any material, getting ready for your exam. And I will see you all in lab tomorrow at 2:30.